Have you ever looked around your home, maybe while sipping a quiet cup of coffee in the morning, and wondered how long you'll be able to keep doing this on your own? The bending, the lifting, even just getting around from room to room. It's a question many of us eventually face. And when the body starts whispering louder than it used to, the world seems quick to suggest one thing. It might be time for a nursing home. But let's pause here. Because rushing into a nursing home isn't always the answer. Not for everyone. And not right away. In fact, there are other paths, some unexpected, some surprisingly joyful, that allow you to hold on to your independence, your identity, and even your sense of adventure. You see, aging doesn't mean surrendering. It doesn't mean giving up the things that make you feel alive. Whether it's your garden, your knitting needles, your morning walks, or simply the sound of your own front door closing behind you. This chapter of life isn't about ending the story. It's about turning the page, thoughtfully, boldly, and on your own terms. Let me share some stories with you. Real stories. Stories of people just like you, in their 70s, 80s, even 90s, who were told it was time to slow down or settle in to a nursing facility. But they didn't. They found another way. And in doing so, they discovered something remarkable. Take Grandma Betty, for instance. She's 83 and lives alone, not because she has to, but because she wants to. Now, let me be clear. She's not out doing cartwheels or running marathons. Her joints ache on rainy days, and she's no stranger to forgetting where she left her reading glasses. But she's also not someone who gives in easily. When her family began nudging the idea of moving into assisted living, she listened kindly and then told them, "If I'm going to live slower, I'm going to live smarter." So what did Betty do? She leaned into technology. Now, I know what you might be thinking. I can barely open my email, let alone run a smart home. But Betty started simple. Her grandson set her up with voice-activated lights, a video doorbell, and a little gadget she can talk to when she needs help or just wants to hear her favorite song. She learned to use video calls, and suddenly, she wasn't just watching her great-grandkids grow up in photos. She was reading bedtime stories to them through the screen. And that's the beauty of it. Technology didn't turn her house into a space station. It turned it into a bridge between safety and freedom, between independence and connection. Betty might have silver hair and a walker parked near the couch, but she's still living life on her terms. And her laughter, it fills every room she walks into, virtually or otherwise. Then there's Mr. Anderson. You wouldn't guess it by looking at him, but he's 92. He walks a little slower, sure, and needs help getting in and out of a car. But don't let that fool you. This man is an adventurer at heart. You see, while some people his age are watching travel shows on TV, Mr. Anderson decided to star in his own. A few years back, his daughter asked him what he'd regret not doing if he ran out of time. He smiled and said, "I always wanted to see the ruins in Greece, and maybe sip espresso in Paris." She thought he was joking. He wasn't. So they packed their bags. He didn't do it for bragging rights. He did it for the sheer joy of being somewhere new, of smelling foreign spices, of watching sunsets from balconies that weren't in his own zip code. They skipped the cruises and tour buses. Mr. Anderson preferred to walk cobblestone streets, poke into bookstores, chat with locals over a simple bowl of soup. Now, was it easy? No. They had to plan around medications, mobility, bathroom access, time zones. But it was worth it. Because every photo they took wasn't just a picture, it was a stamp in his soul. A reminder that aging doesn't erase your curiosity. It just makes the moments you chase even more meaningful. And what's amazing is this. Mr. Anderson didn't postpone adventure until it was convenient. He embraced it while he still could. Because deep down he understood a truth many of us quietly ignore. The window for wonder doesn't close all at once. It narrows gradually. And if we're not paying attention, we might miss the chance to reach through it and grab something beautiful. Meanwhile, back on familiar soil, there's Mrs. Parker, a retired teacher in her 70s. After decades of guiding young minds and molding futures, she found herself sitting in a very quiet house, with a very loud sense of, now what? She didn't like the silence, and she didn't like the idea of her final years being spent in the background. So she chose something different. She moved into a community, not a nursing home, but a neighborhood filled with people like her, people who still had something to give. At first, her family raised their eyebrows. "You're leaving your house? You're starting over?" But she smiled, because she knew it wasn't about leaving something behind. It was about stepping into something new. In that community, Mrs. Parker found a rhythm. She started teaching knitting classes, joined a poetry circle, took walks with new friends who laughed at the same jokes and knew the same old songs. And something inside her lit up again. Purpose. That's what returned. Because let's be honest, it's not just the body that slows down as we age. Sometimes it's the feeling of being useful, of being needed, of being seen. And what Mrs. Parker discovered is that when you surround yourself with people who understand your journey, you don't fade, you flourish. Maybe you're hearing these stories and nodding along, thinking, I want that, but I'm not sure where to begin. Or maybe part of you worries it's too late to start something new. But I'll tell you what, if Grandma Betty can become tech-savvy at 83, if Mr. Anderson can explore the ruins of Greece at 92, and if Mrs. Parker can find purpose in a new community after leaving a decades-old home, then your story still has pages left to write too. You don't have to go big. You don't need a passport or a smart home or a poetry circle. All you need is a bit of courage to ask yourself, what do I truly want out of this next chapter? More connection? More adventure? More peace? Because rushing into a nursing home, or any decision made out of fear, robs you of that question. It assumes the answer is already written. But it's not. Not yet. Some people think that once the physical body starts slowing down, everything else should slow down with it. But if you've ever felt that quiet tug in your heart, the one that whispers, I'm still here, I still have more to give, then you already know. The body doesn't always tell the full story. That brings me to someone I think you'll enjoy hearing about, Mr. Wilson. At 79, he was known in his neighborhood for having the most beautiful garden you've ever seen. Roses, tomatoes, herbs, little lemon trees in pots. It was like stepping into a painting. But time has a way of creeping in, even among the flowers. His knees ached more, his back didn't cooperate, and his hands, once so nimble, had grown tired. His children gently suggested he stop, or at least consider moving somewhere easier. A nursing home, maybe, where he wouldn't have to worry about weeds or watering cans or uneven stone paths. They meant well, of course. They were trying to protect him, but Mr. Wilson didn't see it that way. His garden wasn't just dirt and seeds, it was his soul. Every blossom held a memory. Every tree told a story. And while he knew he couldn't keep up the same pace, he also knew he didn't have to give it all up. So he did something wise. He downsized. He gave away some of the more demanding plants to neighbors who promised to care for them. He replaced big flower beds with raised planters he could tend while seated. He filled pots with lavender and mint, hardy, forgiving herbs that didn't ask for much. And you know what happened? He flourished right along with that garden. Because here's a truth worth remembering. Joy doesn't have to be big to be real. Sometimes the smallest patch of earth, a few pots on a porch, a bird feeder near the kitchen window, can keep your spirit blooming. And Mr. Wilson's story reminds us that aging isn't about letting go of what we love. It's about reshaping it, resizing it, and finding ways to keep it close without letting it exhaust us. The people who visited him didn't see a lesser garden, they saw peace. And when he sat in his chair beside it, sipping his tea and watching the bees dance among the basil, he wasn't thinking about what he'd lost. He was savoring what he still had. And isn't that what we all want in the end? Not perfection, not control, just enough to still feel connected to the things that give us life. Now let me tell you about Mrs. Johnson. She's 84, and she still lives in the same little blue house she and her husband bought over 50 years ago. The one with the creaky screen door, the faded photos on the wall, and the oak tree out front that's been there longer than most of the neighbors. When her kids started nudging her toward the idea of moving into a care facility, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't protest. She just sat them down, looked them in the eyes, and said, "This house holds my whole life. Why would I leave it now?" It wasn't about being stubborn. It was about roots. About the feeling you get when you know where everything is, down to the exact spot the floor creaks when you walk through the hall. About the warmth of memories tucked into every corner. Birthday cakes on the kitchen table, Thanksgiving laughter echoing down the hall, the smell of fresh laundry and Sunday roast. Mrs. Johnson knew she couldn't manage everything by herself. But she also knew she didn't have to. Her family worked out a schedule: weekly visits, help with groceries and cleaning, video check-ins. They brought the support to her, instead of asking her to leave everything she loved behind. And let me tell you something. When you walk into her home, you feel something you just don't get in a facility. It's not just familiar, it's sacred. It's layered with the kind of comfort that only time can build. What Mrs. Johnson teaches us is this: sometimes staying put isn't about resisting change. It's about honoring the life you've built. And with the right support, it's possible. Because home isn't just a place where you sleep. It's where your story lives. And when you're surrounded by that kind of love, whether it's in person or through a phone call or a letter from a grandchild, it has a power that no sterile hallway or shared cafeteria can replace. Not everyone gets to stay home, I understand that. Sometimes health issues demand a different setup. But for many, the key is finding a way to balance care with continuity. To preserve the things that matter most. Not just safety, but soul. It's easy for others to look at aging and assume it means giving up. But every story I've shared with you so far proves the opposite. These folks didn't deny the changes that came with time. They worked with them. They adapted. They asked themselves what parts of life they still wanted to hold on to, and then they got creative about how to make that happen. And you know what? That creativity isn't something reserved for the young. In fact, some of the most resourceful people I know are in their 70s, 80s, and 90s. Why? Because when you've lived through decades of joys, losses, surprises, and changes, you learn how to reinvent. You learn how to bend without breaking. Whether it's gardening with a stool instead of a shovel, living in a house with a little more dust and a lot more love, or using FaceTime instead of face-to-face, the core lesson is the same. You don't have to rush into a nursing home just because you're older. Your life is not on pause. It's not fading. It's unfolding. Slowly, maybe. Differently, sure. But it's still yours to live. With dignity, grace, and heart. And maybe, just maybe, someone out there needs to hear that right now. Maybe that someone is you. Sometimes the hardest part of growing older isn't the aches or the slower pace. It's the quiet fear that you might slowly disappear. Not from the world entirely, but from the life you used to know. From the porch swing you loved, the laughter at family dinners, the sound of your own thoughts in a familiar kitchen. But here's something worth remembering. You are not fading. You're evolving. And this chapter, this season of life, still belongs to you. That brings us back to someone we met briefly earlier. Grandpa Henry. He's 85 now. The kind of man who wakes up before the sun. Not because he has to, but because he enjoys the peace that comes with the morning. For years, he walked the same route around his block. A quiet loop past the bakery, the post office, and the little coffee shop where they know his name and how he likes his toast. When his family started suggesting a move to a facility, a place where he'd have meals delivered and someone nearby at all times, he didn't get angry. He understood the concern. But he also knew something deep in his bones. If he left now, something inside him would dim. So he didn't argue. He simply said, "Let me stay as long as I can do it with a little help." That little help came in many forms. A neighbor who brought over soup once a week. A home aide who stopped by every few days to assist with groceries and light chores. A granddaughter who FaceTimed him every evening to check in, laugh, and sometimes just sit quietly together. Grandpa Henry never denied that he was aging. He just didn't believe aging meant surrender. And he was right. You see, independence doesn't always mean doing everything by yourself. Sometimes it just means choosing how and where you live, even if that means accepting a little assistance along the way. There's a quiet kind of strength in saying, "Yes, I need help, but I'm still me. I still matter." And when you hold on to that, when you protect the pieces of your life that make you feel whole, you carry your dignity with you into each new day. I think of all these stories. Betty with her smart devices, Mr. Anderson chasing sunsets in Italy, Mrs. Parker knitting purpose back into her life, Mr. Wilson adapting his garden, Mrs. Johnson preserving the heartbeat of home, and Grandpa Henry finding freedom through flexibility. And I can't help but feel hopeful. Because aging doesn't have to mean letting go of joy. It doesn't have to mean giving up on being seen, being useful, being fully alive. It just means living differently, more thoughtfully, with intention. And more than anything, it means honoring what matters to you, not what others think should matter at your age. It's easy to feel invisible as we get older. The world moves faster, technology changes daily, and sometimes even our own families struggle to understand how we feel. But that's why stories like these are so important. They remind us, and those around us, that aging is not an ending. It's a different kind of beginning. Maybe for you, it's starting a new project, writing, painting, or teaching something you've always loved. Maybe it's choosing to stay in your home and adapt it with tools that make life easier. Maybe it's saying no to the idea that a nursing home is your only safe option, and yes to the idea that your spirit knows what it needs. The truth is, there's no one-size-fits-all path for growing older. Some people thrive in group settings, others need solitude. Some find peace in downsizing, others find purpose in staying rooted. Some people rediscover joy in the simplest things: a cup of coffee on the porch, a crossword puzzle, a grandchild's voice on the phone. And no matter where you are on your journey, your choices still matter. So if you've been wondering what comes next, if you've felt that pressure to hand over the keys to your independence, just because a few things have gotten harder, I want to gently remind you, you still have a say. You still have value, and you still have time to shape this part of your life in a way that reflects who you are, not just what the world expects of someone your age. Of course, no one path is perfect. Some days will feel heavy. There will be challenges, maybe even fears you don't always talk about, but there will also be laughter, connection, peace, and those little victories that come from choosing your life on purpose. So ask yourself, what really makes you feel alive? Is it a routine? A room full of family? The breeze through an open window in a house filled with memories? Whatever it is, don't rush past it. Don't trade it too quickly for convenience or safety that comes at the cost of meaning. There are ways to balance both, to be cared for without being tucked away. And if you've already made hard choices, or even if you're living in a facility right now, that's okay too. This isn't about judgment. It's about reminding each of us that our lives still have space for joy, connection, and dignity. No matter where we are or what stage we're in, you are not your aches. You are not your medications or your paperwork. You are not a burden. You are a living, breathing story. One that's still being written. So whether you're standing in your garden, holding a tablet on a video call, sitting beside a suitcase, or quietly rocking in a chair by a window, know this: you matter, you are needed. You still have more to live, more to give, and more to discover. And if this video reminded you of that, even just a little, I hope you'll take a moment to share your thoughts below. We'd love to hear your story. Maybe you've made similar decisions. Maybe you're still deciding. Or maybe you just needed a little encouragement today. Whatever the case, leave a comment. Let us know you're here. And if you found this helpful, be sure to like the video and subscribe to Strong Elderly Life for more stories and support designed just for you. Here's to living your best life. Not someday, not long ago, but right now. And here's to never forgetting that getting older doesn't mean growing smaller. It means growing deeper, more grounded, more you. Take care of yourself. You're worth it.